Maya adjusted her coat around her growing belly, taking a deep breath as she approached the courthouse steps. She was 8 months pregnant, and each step felt heavier, not just from the weight of the baby but from the emotional burden she carried. Today was her court date, a day she hoped would bring some measure of justice, but deep down, she felt the familiar ache of apprehension. She had prepared herself, told herself to stay calm, but the reality of the biased courtroom she was about to enter cast a shadow over her thoughts. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter. Maya took a seat, glancing around at the people present, the attorney, some unfamiliar faces, and Judge Williams himself, a tall, stern-looking man with silver hair and an expression of unwavering authority. He was well known for his harsh rulings and the frequent complaints about his discriminatory behavior, but complaints were rarely enough to bring change. She had heard stories, mostly whispers from others in the community who felt crushed by his judgments, and today, she feared she might be another name on that list. As the proceedings began, Maya tried to focus, but her mind drifted to her child, a child who would be born into a world that still saw race before humanity. She straightened in her seat, determined to make her case clear, to speak not just for herself, but for her baby. But as she started to speak, Judge Williams interrupted with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Ms. Jackson, let's not waste time with personal stories. Just get to the point," he said, his voice as cold as his gaze. Maya felt a flush of frustration, but she swallowed it down, forcing herself to remain composed. "I believe I deserve a fair hearing," she replied, her voice steady but firm. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow, almost as if amused. "Everyone here is given a fair hearing. However, the facts speak for themselves, and emotions have no place in this courtroom." Maya's words caught in her throat, her frustration mounting. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the tone, the way he looked at her as though she were wasting his time simply by being there. Her friend Sarah, who had accompanied her for support, noticed Maya's distress and stood up, her voice cutting through the silence. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice loud enough to command attention, "but I believe Maya has every right to express herself fully. Isn't that what a fair hearing is supposed to allow?" The judge's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "Sit down, or I'll have you removed from the courtroom," he snapped. The room fell silent, and Sarah slowly sat back down, her face flushed with anger. Maya's hands clenched into fists. She felt cornered, singled out, and a burning sense of injustice filled her heart. This wasn't just about her case anymore, it was about standing up against a system that seemed built to suppress voices like hers. But just as the silence settled back in, the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a figure stepped in. A journalist, notebook in hand, took a seat quietly but made sure his presence was noticed. Maya caught his eye, and for a moment, she felt a glimmer of hope. The journalist's arrival changed the atmosphere, adding a layer of tension that was almost palpable. With renewed determination, Maya stood her ground, her voice louder this time. "I am here to have my voice heard. Not just for me, but for others who may have faced the same treatment in this courtroom." Judge Williams shifted uncomfortably, his eyes briefly darting to the journalist, then back to Maya. She saw something change in his expression, perhaps a hint of hesitation, but it quickly disappeared. "Enough. This court will proceed as scheduled, without these unnecessary disruptions," he said. But Maya didn't back down. This was the beginning of something larger, a fight she hadn't anticipated, but one she was now determined to take on. The journalist's pen moved swiftly, capturing every word and reaction, and in that moment, Maya knew she wasn't alone. The community, her friends, and now even the press would stand behind her as she pushed forward. This was only the start, and Maya felt a resolve rising within her, a strength born from the injustices she had faced and the belief that one voice could spark change, even in the most biased of places. As Maya left the courthouse that day, a chill settled over her, but it wasn't the kind brought on by the late autumn air. It was the weight of her experience, of feeling voiceless, reduced, and dismissed by a man in power. But the presence of the journalist, his quiet nod of support, stayed with her, sparking a small but fierce flame of hope in her chest. She had been silenced in that courtroom, but this fight was far from over. That evening, as she sat in her modest living room, the events replayed in her mind. Every word, every look from Judge Williams seemed to fuel her anger and determination. Just as she was absorbed in her thoughts, her phone buzzed. It was her father, Congressman James. They hadn't spoken in a few weeks, but somehow, he must have known that she needed him now. "Maya, I heard what happened today. Are you all right?" His voice, deep and steady, had always been a source of comfort for her. "I don't know, Dad," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I went in there hoping for a fair chance, but it felt like the odds were stacked against me from the moment I walked in." Congressman James sighed, a sound that carried both empathy and a familiar resolve. "Maya, remember what I always told you? Your voice is your strongest weapon. People like Judge Williams rely on silence to maintain their power. But the moment you speak out, they begin to lose control. And that's exactly why you need to keep going." His words struck a chord within her. Maya had always admired her father's resilience, his ability to stand tall in the face of opposition. He had faced his own battles with prejudice, and he had taught her to be proud of who she was, to stand up for herself and others. Hearing him now reignited her sense of purpose. "You're right, Dad," she said after a pause. "I can't let this go. Not when I know there are others who've faced the same treatment. I want to make a change." "Then start with your story. Share it, and people will listen," he encouraged. As they ended the call, Maya felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt earlier. She knew this fight would be challenging, but she was no longer alone in it. Her father's words echoed in her mind, pushing her to take the next step. The next day, Maya called her friend Sarah, who had stood by her in the courtroom. Sarah immediately agreed to help. "We'll need testimonies from others," she said, a fierce determination in her eyes. "People who've been in front of Judge Williams, who know exactly what he's capable of." Together, they began reaching out to people in the community, gathering names, stories, and voices. The response was overwhelming. People shared stories of unfair rulings, harsh sentences, and a judge who seemed to thrive on belittling anyone he deemed unworthy. Every testimony was a piece of the larger puzzle, revealing a pattern of discrimination that could no longer be ignored. Maya knew that to truly make an impact, she would need more than just individual stories. She would need to bring this issue to the public, to expose Judge Williams' conduct on a larger scale. Sarah suggested organizing a press conference, a place where Maya could speak openly about her experience and the stories of others who had suffered under the judge's rulings. Days later, in a small but packed room, Maya stood behind a podium, facing a gathering of reporters and community members. Her hands trembled slightly, but as she looked at the faces in the crowd, people who believed in her, who had faced similar injustices, she found her strength. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "Today, I am here not just to share my story, but to speak on behalf of many who have been silenced in our community. I stood in Judge Williams' courtroom and felt the sting of prejudice, a bias that had no place in the justice system. But I am not the only one. I am one of many who have been dismissed, belittled, and judged unfairly." She paused, looking out at the crowd, letting her words settle. "Today, we stand together, because this fight is not just about one case or one judge. It is about the principle of justice, the belief that every person deserves to be heard, to be treated with respect, no matter their race or background. As she continued, her voice grew stronger, more resolute. She spoke of the testimonies she had gathered, of the people who had come forward despite their fears. Every story was a testament to the resilience of her community, a reminder that change was possible when people united. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. The energy was electric, a sense of unity that filled every corner of the room. Maya felt a surge of hope, an understanding that her voice had power, that her story could spark a movement. Later that evening, as she walked home with Sarah, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that Judge Williams would hear about her press conference, that he would try to dismiss her efforts, perhaps even retaliate. But she was no longer afraid. She had seen the strength of her community, the way people had rallied behind her, and she knew that no threat could silence her now. In the days that followed, Maya continued gathering support, speaking with local leaders, and organizing meetings. Her father continued to offer guidance, reminding her of the importance of resilience and the value of every voice in the fight for justice. With each step, her resolve only grew, turning her pain and frustration into a powerful call for change. As she prepared to face Judge Williams in court once more, Maya felt an unshakable sense of confidence. She was ready, not just for herself, but for every person who had been wronged, every voice that had been silenced. And this time, she would make sure that her voice was heard. The day of her return to court arrived sooner than expected. Maya had spent countless hours preparing, reviewing every testimony she had gathered, every detail that painted the full picture of Judge Williams' biased rulings. She was nervous, but she stood taller, her spirit fueled by the courage of those who had trusted her with their stories. As Maya entered the courthouse, the crowd that had gathered outside cheered her on. Community members, friends, and supporters had come in droves, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "Equality over Bias." The sight brought a swell of pride to Maya's heart. She had started this journey feeling isolated, yet here she was, surrounded by people who believed in her, in the fight for fair treatment. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The familiar faces of the courtroom staff avoided her gaze, while others exchanged wary glances. Judge Williams, seated in his usual place, looked down at her with a cold, calculating stare, as if already trying to find a way to undermine her. Maya took her seat, feeling the weight of his gaze, but she didn't flinch. She had come prepared, ready to confront him with every ounce of strength she could muster. The proceedings began, and as Maya presented her case, she took a bold step. With her voice steady and clear, she addressed Judge Williams directly. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I would like to submit additional evidence," she announced, holding a stack of testimonies. "These are accounts from individuals who have appeared before you, individuals who believe they did not receive fair treatment." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Williams' expression darkened, but he kept his composure, his voice laced with contempt. "Ms. Jackson, this is highly unorthodox. Are you questioning the integrity of this court?" "I am questioning the integrity of your rulings, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice unwavering. "These testimonies tell a story of prejudice, of bias that has no place in our justice system. I believe it's only fair that they be heard." A stunned silence followed her words. Judge Williams clenched his jaw, visibly angered by her defiance. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "This court will not entertain baseless accusations." But Maya didn't back down. She placed the stack of testimonies on the table before her, her resolve unbroken. "These are not baseless accusations, Judge Williams. They are accounts from real people, people who have felt the sting of injustice in this very room. And today, they deserve to be acknowledged. As she spoke, the journalist who had attended her press conference entered the room, notebook in hand. He took a seat, his pen poised, watching every move with sharp intent. Maya noticed his presence, and her confidence only grew. This was no longer just her battle, it was a moment that would be seen, heard, and remembered. Judge Williams attempted to regain control, his voice tense. "The court will proceed as scheduled, without these unnecessary disruptions," he said, but his usual authority seemed diminished, as if the weight of the testimonies before him had shifted the balance. Maya glanced back at the crowd, meeting the eyes of her supporters. Then, taking a deep breath, she began reading aloud one of the testimonies, her voice strong and unyielding. "I appeared before Judge Williams on a minor offense," she read. "But he treated me like a criminal, ignoring my circumstances and imposing a punishment far harsher than necessary. I felt small, dismissed, as if my life didn't matter." The words hung heavy in the air, their impact undeniable. Maya looked up, meeting Judge Williams' glare. "These are the words of one of many, Your Honor. Are you truly going to ignore them?" Judge Williams, visibly shaken, tried to interrupt, but Maya continued, determined to make every voice heard. She read testimony after testimony, each one a story of unfair treatment, of a judge who wielded his power as a tool of oppression rather than justice. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, each word a powerful reminder of the injustice that had long gone unchecked. With each account, Maya felt the room's support growing. She could see it in the nods of the onlookers, in the determined expressions of her friends and family. This was her moment, her chance to make a change, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Finally, after what felt like hours, she finished reading. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Judge Williams, whose face had grown pale. His authority, once unquestioned, seemed fragile under the weight of the testimonies, the undeniable proof of his actions. Maya addressed him one last time, her voice calm but resolute. "Your Honor, today, I am not alone. Today, I stand with every person who has felt belittled, dismissed, and mistreated in this courtroom. And today, I demand accountability." The journalist's pen flew across the page, capturing every word, every reaction. The tension was thick, an unspoken challenge hanging in the air. Judge Williams, his facade cracking, struggled to regain his composure. He looked out over the crowd, his voice barely a whisper. "This court will review these testimonies," he muttered, his voice lacking its usual bite. Maya felt a surge of victory. She knew that this was just the beginning, that true change wouldn't come easily. But today, she had forced Judge Williams to confront the voices he had long tried to silence. Today, she had broken through his wall of authority, leaving cracks that could not be mended. As the proceedings adjourned, Maya turned to her supporters, her heart swelling with gratitude. They had stood by her, believed in her fight, and now, they had seen a glimmer of justice. Her father, standing near the back, met her eyes and gave a nod of approval, pride evident in his gaze. Maya left the courtroom that day with a newfound strength. She had faced Judge Williams, unafraid and unwavering, and in doing so, she had taken a powerful step toward change. This was more than just her victory, it was a victory for every voice that had been silenced, for every person who had ever felt powerless. As she walked down the courthouse steps, the crowd erupted in cheers. People reached out, congratulating her, thanking her, and promising to stand by her as she continued her fight. Maya felt their support like a wave of strength, a reminder that her voice, once small and ignored, had grown into a force that could no longer be denied. This was only the beginning. And with her community behind her, Maya was ready for whatever lay ahead. The days that followed Maya's confrontation with Judge Williams were a whirlwind of emotions, meetings, and interviews. Her story spread quickly, gaining traction beyond her community. News outlets covered the case, and Maya's name became synonymous with courage and resilience. She found herself thrust into the spotlight, but instead of shrinking from it, she embraced it. This was her chance to spark real change, and she intended to make every moment count. Support poured in from all directions. Local activists reached out, eager to assist in any way they could. Community leaders began organizing rallies, urging others to come forward with their own stories of injustice. Maya watched in awe as the movement grew, fueled by people who had been silent for too long. She felt humbled and inspired by the courage of those who shared their painful experiences, each story adding to the collective demand for accountability. One evening, as Maya was reviewing a draft statement for a rally, she received a message from Sarah, her loyal friend and supporter. "Turn on the news," it read. Curious, Maya switched on the TV, and there he was, Judge Williams. He stood at a press conference, flanked by his legal team, his face visibly strained. The pressure was mounting, and for the first time, he was being forced to publicly address the accusations against him. After careful consideration, he began, his tone subdued, "I have decided to step down from my position while a thorough investigation is conducted. I maintain that I acted within the bounds of the law, but I acknowledge the concerns raised by the community." Maya's heart raced as she watched him speak. This was more than she had hoped for, a direct consequence of the voices she had gathered, the courage she had shown. The community's resilience had forced a powerful man to take a step back, to face the repercussions of his actions. After the announcement, messages flooded her phone. Friends, family, and supporters shared their congratulations, their words full of pride and admiration. Maya felt a mixture of relief and gratitude, but she knew this was only the first step. The resignation was significant, but it wouldn't heal the wounds caused by years of biased rulings. There was more work to be done. A few days later, Maya stood on the steps of the courthouse, preparing to address a large crowd that had gathered for a rally. Beside her was her father, Congressman James, a beacon of support who had been there every step of the way. As she looked out over the crowd, she recognized so many faces, people who had testified, community members who had supported her, and even strangers who had been inspired by her story. Taking a deep breath, Maya began to speak. "Today, we stand here not just because of one judge's actions, but because of a system that has allowed injustice to go unchecked for far too long. Judge Williams' resignation is a victory, yes, but it is only the beginning. We must continue to hold those in power accountable, to demand a system that treats everyone fairly, regardless of race or background." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers filling the air with a powerful energy. Maya continued, her voice steady and strong. "This journey has shown me the strength of our community. Together, we are unstoppable. And together, we will keep pushing for change, not just in this courthouse, but across every institution that has failed us." As she spoke, she saw the faces of those who had inspired her to fight, Sarah, the journalist, and the countless people who had shared their stories. Each one had played a vital role in this movement, and their courage had become her fuel. After the rally, Maya and her father shared a quiet moment. Congressman James looked at his daughter with pride, a warmth in his eyes that conveyed more than words could ever say. "You've done something incredible, Maya," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've given people hope, a reason to believe in change." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You've always shown me what it means to stand up for what's right." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Maya. Remember, the path to justice is long, but it's worth every step." In the weeks that followed, Maya continued to push forward, working closely with activists, lawmakers, and community leaders. Together, they advocated for reforms within the judicial system, creating initiatives aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. Her case had become a catalyst for change, inspiring similar movements across the state. People began to speak out against other instances of judicial bias, and slowly, the walls of systemic injustice started to crack. The journey wasn't easy, and Maya knew there would be setbacks along the way. But she also knew that she was not alone. Her fight had become a shared mission, a rallying cry that resonated with people everywhere. And with every new voice that joined the cause, her resolve only grew stronger. One evening, as she was finishing up a community meeting, Maya received a letter from a young woman who had attended the rally. The woman thanked her for her bravery, sharing that Maya's story had inspired her to pursue a career in law, to work from within the system to make a difference. Maya felt a surge of emotion as she read the words, realizing that her journey had sparked a ripple effect, one that would continue long after her case had faded from the headlines. Maya walked home that night, the city lights reflecting her sense of hope. She thought of her unborn child and felt a deep sense of purpose. This fight was for the next generation, for a world where her child could grow up knowing that justice was not a privilege, but a right for all. As she looked up at the night sky, Maya felt a sense of fulfillment that words could hardly capture. She had faced fear, confronted prejudice, and emerged stronger. Her voice, once dismissed and disregarded, had become a force for change. And while the journey was far from over, Maya knew she was ready for whatever lay ahead. For now, she would continue to fight, to stand for those who could not, and to ensure that the echoes of her voice, and the voices of her community, would be heard for generations to come.